This is my polymer clay keyblade made with polymer clay. It's the Unbound Keyblade. Started with a lump of clay, rolled it out flat, took this picture, used a knife tool to dot around the details so I would get the details right. Then I carved the details into the piece, cut it out with a X-Acto knife, baked it. Then I took a Dremel tool and burred out the finer details. Now it's ready to be sealed and then painted. And I will update when I get a chance to about the sealed product. But as you can see, fits perfect. Okay, so I'm going on to the painting portion of this. As you can see, my Keyblade, painting at both sides. The Unbound Keyblade has a lot of fading from the tips of the Keyblade that fade to white, to the pink that fades to purple and then blue, and the green that fades in and out of dark and light, and the pink that fades out at the edge. I examined a lot of it. As you can see, I have painted first the color before adding the black, so that any uneven edges I have, doing it in layers like this, doing the color first and the black later, the darker color will cover over any runoff or excess color. When I paint the black, as long as I'm careful not to get it on the colored bits, I should be able to effortlessly and flawlessly cover up all the little overages right there. And here it is, colored, painted, glazed. Now I'm going to have to make the keychain, but so far it is a beautiful, beautiful necklace. Yep. I'm going to finish the keychain in a minute. I'm going to get to the keychain. For the keychain, I'm going to take this clay here, Sculpey Original. This is the cheapest one I could get. Buy because I don't have a lot of money. Since I don't have a lot of money, I just bought what I could. Ziploc bag. I took a small amount of clay, laying it over my work area. Make sure it's the right size. And I will adjust this until it's the right size. A little bit of thickness won't hurt. Just pressing it out flat. Taking that, placing this over the top of it. Pokey tool. Using firm pressure, I'm just dotting around where the details are. Making sure I'm going all the way around in very detailed fashion, following the line. Making sure I don't leave anything out. Make sure I'm following it. Nice firm pressure. In fact, in some of these instances, the blade tip's actually going through the paper. which is fine. Now, if you're successful, when you lift it up, there should be a outline of what you've just tapped. Now you've got to trace this a little bit. The tool. I mean, you can do this, or you can just leave it the way it is and then stuff, but I personally want to trace it. If you're losing track of the way it's supposed to look, you can always refer back to the picture. What it's supposed to look. Looks like right now. Just compare the two. Make sure you don't accidentally do something you don't want to do. But this is just as a guide so that as you're doing it, you're getting it in the right proportions. Because everyone that does these kinds of things knows proportions matter. Now, hopefully, this will work out well. If it doesn't look perfect, that's fine. You can always use your finger to smudge the edges and start again. It doesn't need to look perfect. If you have a Dremel tool, you can always burr it out later. When you bake this, you can always take sandpaper and like get it better later. And this isn't the final product, so you can always, any fine details that don't quite match, you can always redo later. Just doing the same repeated thing for the keychain loops. I folded it right at the link between the chain and the tail end because it's already finished. Then I just line it up for the next link. Trace again. At the end of it you have what looks like this. I marked off at the end of where the keyblade should end up, and then I have this all along. As you see, I have substantial kind of thickness to it. When I cut this out, it's going to maintain the thickness. If I want to, I can sand down the edges, but I'm going to start with this first. Now I just take X-Acto knife and cut. Make sure the knife is straight up and down, or else you're going to end up with a very uneven result. Just gotta follow the edge. Pretend you're cutting something out for school. You can always take some off later, but putting something on is a little more tricky. You just do this. Yeah, I did a little bit of tidying up of the lines to make sure that everything was proportionate from top to bottom, to make sure I didn't accidentally carve a slant into one side. And then I used the clay that I had around and filled in some pieces, and just took my tool, I took this tool here, and just circled that to make those fine details. I'll later fill in the edges if I feel like it later, but just did some little work around just to make sure everything was the right thickness and shape. As you can see, it's linked together by a single piece of clay. And as you see, I maintained the thickness. I'm going to keep that thickness. Now I'm just going to take this tool and dig out the little bits right here, or carve it around, however. I think I've actually decided to go with the technique of taking this and just straight up and down, just work the clay very slowly. Remember, the thicker it is, the more durable it's going to end up being. So you don't have to necessarily dig anything out specifically. You just have to make sure that there's enough clay there that when it bakes it's going to be nice and sturdy. And about the finer edges and how sloppy it looks around the edges, you can just blend those with your fingers before you bake it, or you can sand it after you've baked it. Depends on what kind of tools you have on hand. If you've got a lot of good tools you can use, feel free to go ahead and, leave it till after you bake it, because you can just use your tools. But if you don't have a lot of tools on hand, you're trying to use your fingers, just use your fingers. Doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. As long as you get the main shape in there, you can always, everything else is optional. Just like that. It depends on whether or not you want the finer details to be. However, it really doesn't make a lot of difference. I have a Dremel tool, so I'll just come through later and finish it up after I've baked it, or I can just smooth it with my fingers before. Either way, you want it to look like your keychain. That's what you're aiming for, ultimately. So just keep referring back to your picture for the shape. Bake it, carve it, whatever you want to do. But if you're gonna use if you're gonna attach it to your Keyblade, which I'm gonna eventually do to mine, you can figure some way of either making a separate piece of clay to attach right here that you can drill a hole through, or if you make this thick enough, you can just burr it straight across, like that. Okay, I have baked it. I just cut to this point, but as you can see, I bulked up the top. I bulked up the top of it so it would hold a puncture from that tool I was using that was a puncture tool. Punctured the top, bulked it up, punctured it. So there's a hole for a keychain thing. I'm going to take my Dremel tool and I'm going to refine some of the finer details. As a warning, when you go to pry up this piece, because it's so thin, it's going to scrunch it slightly, so you're going to spend a little bit of time perfecting the shape once more, transferring it to the baking sheet, unless you decide to do the entire project on the baking sheet itself so you can throw it straight in the oven. It's going to take a little bit of time getting the contours back in. I'm going to finish this up with a little bit of a Dremel tool perfecting. What I've learned from Sculpey.com is that you need to seal the piece before you paint it, or else sometimes the paint, depending on if it's not acrylic and water-based acrylic, if it's not like acrylic paint, they'll actually, the oil in this and the paint will actually interact and make the piece meld and sticky. So they say on Sculpey to clean it with nail varnish remover, so I'm going to use some nail polish remover just to clean it up with any oil residue on the outside, which might not allow the paint to stick because it is oil-based, the Sculpey. I'm just going to go some nail varnish remover. It'll dry real quick. I'm not going to soak it. I'm just going to run it over with a cotton ball and some polish remover. Then I'm going to seal it before painting so that I get that nice stick. Now we have the finished keychain thing. Finished painting it, I just have to seal it with the Mod Podge acrylic sealer, which you can also use Sculpey sealer apparently. I just can't afford any other sealer, so I'm just going to use the one I have on hand. But as you can see, I've painted it silver and gold using water-based acrylic paint that they have at Wal-mart. And be careful not to use nail polish or certain kinds of paint, because that'll actually eat through the clay itself, because clay is sensitive to certain kinds of paint. The list of contraindicated paints is on Sculpey.com. You can look on the back of the box too to see what paints to use and what paints not to use. once I spray paint this with a sealer, it should be finished and ready to hang. And here is the finished product. I used the same technique on the Keyblade. As you can see, I rolled it first into a single thickness and then finished off the finer details, baked it, and painted it, sealed it. Same with the keychain. Now it's dangling off the side of the Keyblade. And what I did afterwards that you can't tell is that I coated parts of this in glow-in-the-dark fabric paint so that later on it'll glow in the dark at night. And I attached the keychain to the side of the Keyblade because I'm making this into a necklace. It'll be a very pretty necklace.